Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the news that's delighted Mr Farage. Theresa May is going to trigger Article 50 on Wednesday next week, formally starting the process of taking the UK out of the EU. Not everyone is sharing in the delight, though. Yesterday, thousands of people took to the streets in London to show support for the European Union and to protest against Brexit. You'd be forgiven for thinking it may be a few months late for that. Well, joining me in the studio now is the former Lib Dem leader, Nick Clegg, who gave a speech at that protest yesterday. Hello, and thank you for being with us today. Now, I am very keen to talk about Brexit, but first, I was interested to get your thoughts on the appalling events that happened in Westminster this week. You were Deputy Prime Minister for 5 years, and you've been in those top-level briefings. How do you think Theresa May's handled it?
I think she's handled it well. And you're quite right. I sat with her and David Cameron and unfortunately in many meetings for 5 years trying to work out what to do with and how to prepare for exactly that kind of eventuality. And I don't want to make it sounds callous, but I'm afraid everybody was expecting something like this to happen, and the emergency services and the police and the kind of nerve system in Whitehall and the Prime Minister, I think, reacted the right way, not least by signalling, as she did immediately in the aftermath of that horrific attack, that we shouldn't immediately lurch to sort of try and reach for new off-the-shelf solutions for what is a very, very difficult problem, which is very difficult to know what's going on in someone's head, particularly someone in this, or it appears to be in this case, who's acted largely, perhaps not exclusively, alone.
You say that we shouldn't lurch for off-the-shelf solutions. At the same time, though, it's pretty shocking, isn't it? A man on his own, armed with a car and a knife, can get inside Parliament's grounds. I mean, surely there is a case for arming policemen at Parliament now.
Oh, I think, of course, that there will now be a review on exactly those kind of things.
So do you think that policemen should be armed then?
I think there's clearly a case to look at what they call the outer perimeter, so literally the first sort of line of defence, if you like, for the parliamentary estate. And there were, if I understand it correctly, armed officers there for a while, and they were, if like, brought back a bit. Should they be brought forward again? I don't think politicians should start sort of trying to sort of populate this debate with their own personal views, but that's exactly something which should be subject to review by people who know what they're talking about, and we should be inclined to then implement what they say. But your characterisation of it is very appropriate. In an open, free society, if someone's prepared to kill themselves and just armed with a hire car and a rudimentary with a kitchen knife, they can do an enormous amount of harm. And we must do everything we can to protect ourselves and protect our institutions and, crucially, protect our values. But we do, unfortunately, live in a world where if you want to retain an open democratic society, you can't make yourself safe 100% of the time. And that's exactly the kind of that's the difficulty in this debate, and I thought that was appropriately and well reflected by the Prime Minister in the immediate aftermath of the attack.
You've, of course, been quite a strong champion of civil liberties in Parliament, but isn't it time really to get real, to look at the attacks that we're facing, the fact that there's security services dealing with 550 live cases at any time. They say that they've thwarted 13 potential attacks since 2013. We need to get tight on giving the security services the tools they need, don't we? Have you been wrong in the past on civil liberties?
No, we've always given them the tools, including myself. In fact, I pushed through controversial legislation against the irony of ironies resistance from David Davis, who even brought the government at the time to court precisely to give the security services the tools that they need.
So how about ending end-to-end encryption for social media services like WhatsApp?
Well, that's quite different. This is the so-called Snoopers Charter, which has now been pushed through by this government. I don't feel now, and I didn't feel in government, that was appropriate. No other developed society has done it. Denmark, I think, tried it once and found that they hoovered up so much useless data, vast volumes of it, they didn't know what to do with it. It hasn't been proven as a proportionate response to precisely the kind of attack you're talking about. But look, if you want to make your society 100% safe, you're right, we could impose a curfew at 7 p.m. We could put controls on people which would be entirely unacceptable in a free society. precisely the kind of thing that the attacker on Wednesday sought to do, is to shake our own confidence in our own democratic values, and that he did that by attacking the home of our democracy. We should be very careful, and to be fair to the Prime Minister, I think she has been careful in the words she has chosen since then, not to, in totally understandably wanting to react to these horrific events, actually do so in a way which might raise a question mark about some of those democratic values that we hold so dear.
Let's talk about Brexit now. The Lib Dems have been supporting a second referendum on the deal. You and your leader were at this march, the anti-Brexit march yesterday. The Lib Dems have amended the Brexit bill. Are you in denial that it's going to happen?
No, I think if the Brexiteers last summer had spelt out to the British people exactly what kind of Brexit they were pursuing, if there'd been an agreement between your previous guests, Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove and the rest of them, about not only wanting to take the European Union out...
People were quite clear about leaving the single market, weren't they?
No, they weren't at all.
Well, they were. George Osborne...
George Osborne was on the other side. Not the
yes,
people,
but what I'm saying is the debate
I never got, and you never got, no one looking at this programme got a clear manifesto from Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove on a cross-party basis saying, we want you to leave the European Union and this is how we will do it. So in other words, there's a huge question now over the next 2 years about what kind of Brexit, hard or soft, inside or outside the single market. Are we going to abide by the European Court of Justice? What kind of changes to freedom of movement? What kind of changes to our universities? What kind of changes to our farmers, our fishing, and so on and so forth? All of that is going to affect almost every aspect of our lives. Once we know what it means in practice, rather than the utopian promises that all will be brilliant and all will be well, of course we think it is right, not a second referendum, that the British people should then have their say. Because there's going to be a deal, right? Well, at least I hope there is. There's going to be a deal. Who then has to decide upon that deal? Is it the politicians? Is it Theresa May on her own? Or is it the people? And we think, quite rightly, in keeping with the decision last summer, it should be the people. And by the way, this is not some exotic Lib Dem invention. David Davis, John Redwood, other Eurosceptics like this have for years been arguing precisely that this is a two-step process. Make the decision to leave and then take a final decision in the hands of the people on how you do so.
Some people listening to this will think you sound a bit like a bad loser here, that the Lib Dems lost dozens of seats at the last election, many of you got booted out of Parliament, you lost the referendum, and now you're effectively trying to stop democracy. I mean, I can understand why you perhaps don't like the results of democracy very much, but you have to accept it, don't you?
I don't actually accept that 16.1 million people, almost 50% of people who voted last summer, are having their dreams, their aspirations and their needs so summarily brushed under the carpet. And I personally think that the choices that the government's taken since last summer are choices which they needn't have taken. I believe that the Prime Minister and this government could have taken a much, much more moderate view in trying to reach out to, not least, by the way, young people who voted in overwhelming numbers for a different future. It's a very perilous path for a country, I think, to take such a momentous decision on its own future against the explicit stated wishes of those people who have to inhabit that future, the young. 70% of youngsters who voted, and they voted in huge numbers, voted to remain. So surely actually the duty on the government is not to shout down people like me, is to say, how do you reach out to the whole country by pursuing this self-harming, hard Brexit, making these choices which they needn't have taken, and they're only doing to satisfy people like Nigel Farage. The government, I think, is not actually reflecting the very divided opinion that emerged in the referendum.
I'm quite interested as well to get a sense of how it is for you to be in Parliament now, because under your leadership, the Lib Dems got absolutely pummeled, didn't they, at the last election? You lost 48 of your 56 seats, and now you seem to be clawing your way back slightly. So do you feel that the problem was you?
No, I don't think so. That for a moment, if you look at smaller centre-left parties who go into coalition with centre-right parties at a time of austerity, I'm afraid they're getting hammered everywhere. We did.
So it wasn't your fault then? Well, it would have happened to anyone.
If it was that simple, if people would just say, oh, it was my fault, and that, you know, then all would be well, because you just have to get rid of people who say it's much more complex than that. The centre-left party in the Netherlands last week just got hammered for the same reason. So the Labour Party in Ireland. There is a real issue for coalition governments and the way in which, for various reasons, for which of course I take a share of responsibility, the smaller parties tend to get the disproportionate share of the blame for the bad stuff, while the larger parties get the disproportionate credit for the good stuff. I don't complain about that. That seems to be quite a common pattern now across Europe. But I always thought the Liberal Democrats would bounce back far faster. I find, as I travel around the country, lots of people are now saying to me that they appreciate the way in which the Liberal Democrats fought very hard to anchor the country in the centre ground over 5 difficult years. They don't like this very ideological approach to Brexit taken by this government. They want a voice against it. They're not getting it from Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. They are getting it from the Liberal Democrats and Tim Farron. And that's why I think we're doing better and will continue to do better in the years ahead.
OK, Nick Clegg, thanks very much for coming on the show.
I've been